Hello everyone. Today we bring you another episode of Orchids in Pop Culture, where we look at the presence of orchids in different types of media. For a bit of variety, we have a movie, an advertisement, and a TV show episode. If you enjoy this type of content, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And if you want to further support us, we have added a super thanks button to the videos, in case you want to make a donation to the channel.
Our movie for this episode is the amazing 2005 adaptation of the classic Jane Austen book, Pride and Prejudice, starring Keira Knightley. I'm sure everyone is familiar with this story, where our main characters, Elizabeth Bennet and the aristocratic Mr. Darcy, both initially dislike each other because of their, as the title states, pride and prejudices, and then inevitably fall in love in the end. The movie starts in the Bennets' modest household, with all 5 sisters going around the house, performing tasks that indicate their contrasting personalities. We also find their mother dedicated to her main interest, securing good marriages for her daughters. While she gives her husband the good news that a wealthy bachelor has moved to an estate nearby, and her daughters eagerly listen into their conversation, the aloof patriarch of the family leaves his office holding an orchid. A Paphiopedilum, to be more exact. We saw someone on Reddit identifying this Paphiopedilum as Paphiopedilum Sing-Ying Rubyweb, but that doesn't really look like the one in the movie. I think it would be impossible to correctly identify it amongst the many hybrids in the market that have mottled leaves, reddish-green petals, and a stripy dorsal sepal. The Paphiopedilum has its flowers staked in a very modern fashion, but they at least secured it with twine instead of plastic clips. After parading the Paphiopedilum through the house, the father settles in the parlor, and we can see another orchid right there behind him in the window. You can just barely tell what it is, but it's hard not to recognize the shape of a Prostechia cochleata flower. In the same scene, we get a better look at the Prostechia. But there's a bit of a continuity error in the movie, and now the same plant no longer has flowers. Here we can now also see from the shape of the pseudobulbs that this is definitely a Prostechia. Now the big question is the presence of these orchids here historically accurate? The original novel was published in 1813, while the movie is set in 1797, the date it is rumored Jane Austen began writing the novel. This is because the movie's director didn't really like the late Regency silhouette, so we moved the plot back a few years to where only the members of high society would be wearing it. It's not like the costumes in this movie are that historically precise as it is, so I don't know why he bothered to make that distinction. But having this story set in the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th, puts it right at the beginning of orchid cultivation in England. This is the same time, however, where orchids were still being brought to Europe by orchid hunters, most of them dying during the trip over, and the surviving ones being sold to the elite for exorbitant prices. Even Kew Gardens only had a handful of tropical orchids in their collection at this point. So the likelihood of a country landowner having several orchids in his possession would be very small. If we look at the specific orchids shown in the movie, even though we can't identify the specific Paphiopedilum he owns, we know that the first Paphiopedilum to be introduced to cultivation in England was Paphiopedilum venustum, and that didn't happen until 1820. Paphiopedilum didn't even become its own genus until 1886. The Prostechia cochleata, however, was described in 1763, at the time as Epidendrum cochleatum. In fact, the first orchid to flower at Kew Gardens was a Prostechia cochleata, in 1787. So it would be more likely to be in cultivation in 1797, at least more likely than the Paphiopedilum. Then there's the matter of where he's growing these orchids. The Paphiopedilum seems to live in his office, as it is shown later on as Elizabeth has a heart-to-heart with her father about her feelings for Mr. Darcy. The Prostechia is only seen that one time in the windowsill of the parlor, so we have to assume that's where it lives. At this time, the few orchid collectors were keeping their prized plants in steam hothouses, another luxury only afforded to the extremely wealthy because of the taxes imposed on glass in the 18th century. So not only were orchids at the time not believed to survive in a plain windowsill, there's no way that Mr. Bennet would have been able to afford a proper greenhouse at the time. A good example of private orchid collectors at this time, and an interesting connection between this novel and orchids, is the fact that, not too far from where Jane Austen lived, was the estate of the Earl of Tankerville and his wife Emma, Lady Tankerville. Emma was an avid plant and orchid collector, and an amateur botanist who illustrated more than 600 plants. But she's mostly known to us, orchid collectors, for being the first person to successfully flower a tropical orchid in England, thus having it named after her, the Phias Tankerville. Actually, she would make a great orchid history episode. We could start making some about particular individuals that have impacted the orchid hobby throughout history. Let us know if you would enjoy that. Emma's daughter followed in her footsteps and hybridized the first tricolor violas. And her name happened to be Mary Elizabeth Bennet, just like the main character in Pride and Prejudice. So who knows if Jane Austen hadn't met the family and even appreciated their plant collections. I bring up this family because, in my opinion, it would have been more realistic if Mr. Darcy was the orchid collector, as the grandson of an earl and a very wealthy gentleman. On the other hand, Mr. Bennet is described in the book as a man that values intellect and wit, loves his books, and even hides in his library from his wife and his more exuberant and childish daughters. So I think the movie gave him the orchids to indicate his intelligence and eccentricity. He's even seen later contemplating a specimen of a dragonfly. Like I said before, a lot of people have pointed out historical inaccuracies with this movie, especially when it comes to costuming, so the orchid anachronisms aren't surprising. And at the end of the day, they don't make the movie any less effective as a Jane Austen adaptation.
Next up, we have another ad featuring orchids. This time for a clothing brand, Pull & Bear. It was created by the digital artist Volche. It features a 3D rendered fell inside a red bag and has a very dreamlike look to it. The bag is, of course, sold by the brand, and it was given a realistic texture. However, the fell has a porcelain-like texture and shine to it, that coupled with the really fluid movements becomes almost hypnotic. Maybe it's our biased eyes, but to us that makes the orchid the star of the ad, and the bag is just a pot. A cool looking pot, but still just a vessel to hold the important stuff. There are no mentions of it, but this ad was made as a Valentine's Day campaign for Pull & Bear's TikTok page. And, seeing as flowers are very traditional Valentine's gifts, I can only assume this is the brand associating one of their products with a traditional gift. Perhaps hoping that instead of an orchid you gift your Valentines with a bag this year? I would much rather have the hypnotic magical orchid, but I don't think that's anywhere in the near future. You can check out Volche's work in their Instagram, which we linked below.
And finally, we have a gardening-inspired murder mystery TV show from 2003 called Rosemary and Thyme. It follows Rosemary Boxer, an expert botanist who has recently been fired from her university job, and her friend Laura Thyme, a former cop that recently left her husband. After their misfortunes, they start working together as landscapers, and naturally solving murders every episode. The episode we're talking about today is only the series' second, where our heroes are hired to redo the gardens of the new house of an aging pop star named Neve Connolly. While working in the garden, Rosemary wants to show Neve's wife Patsy something she found, a wild orchid. We're sorry we can't show you this clip, but NBC is being weirdly, if not illegally, protective of a 20-year-old TV show. It's Anophrys sphagotus, and not only does it grow in England, but also here in Portugal where we live. It's really native to Europe and the Middle East. It is indeed rare in Britain, being more common in the Mediterranean. It's named early spider orchid because it has a distinctive H shape in the labellum that makes it resemble a spider. Near where the orchids are, the construction workers unexpectedly find some bones. Not human, but horse bones, belonging to a horse named Arabica that had gone missing from the stables that used to be in the property. Later that night, the owner of the house hears someone digging outside, goes out to investigate, and is shot dead. I think he had a point when he said the house renovations were cursed. The next day, Rosemary and Laura find human bones and a really ugly button where the murderer had been digging. And inexplicably, they don't go straight to the cops. After many twists and turns, including chasing the current owner of a jacket with buttons so ugly it has changed hands 3 times. They reach the house of construction worker Tommy Matthews and his wife, current ugly coat owner Samantha. If you don't want the story of the episode spoiled, you should skip this part. But it is over 20 years old, so... Upon arriving at the Matthews' house, Rosemary notices that they have something stuck in the bumper of their car. And that something is some weeds and our early spider orchid, the Ophrys fagotas. The area where they grow was near the bones, but nowhere near the construction site. Since the orchid was stuck to the bumper, one of the Matthews has to have been where the bodies were buried, both human and equine, and be the murderer. That'll teach him not to drive over endangered species. If you're not interested in watching the episode, we can tell you that, after a car chase, some inconvenient mud, and some police questioning, Tommy Matthews confesses to having killed both the horse and the stable girl who helped him, under the orders of his boss, to ruin the stable owner as revenge for sleeping with his wife. When the horse was found, Tommy panicked and went there at night to plant the ugly button near the bones, to frame his own wife. What a charming husband. As we saw, Nev found him and was shot. So, we have another murder solved with the power of botany, and orchids that get stuck in car bumpers. I am a sucker for anything murder mystery, even if it's a bit hokey, so I had fun with this episode, and with how silly and charming the concept of this show is. I mean, their names are Rosemary and Thyme, and they solve garden murders.
And that was today's episode. We really hope you enjoyed it. These videos don't get the most views, but we really enjoy making them. And if you agree with us, don't forget to leave the video a like. And of course, subscribe to the channel. We'll see you next week with another video.
Goodbye.